So for the first time, we are doing live streaming. There have been a lot of requests from other part of the world that they want to join these meetings.
You know, if I'd known, I'd put some makeup on. That's okay.
So we are experimenting, so we'll get better.
I was going to say, yeah. Look so far. It's nothing to learn.
Yeah, we started. Yeah.
So good afternoon, NITians. Now we will start our panel discussion with the emphasis on art of negotiation. Just like networking, negotiation is not bad. And negotiation is something that we do every day. Your 4-year-old kid comes and negotiates with you, whether you realize it or not. When the kids want a glass of Coke and you say no, usually they don't like it and you have to negotiate something with them. As the kids get older, some of you might have realized that they know what you will say no for something. For example, kids asking, can I have bottle of Coke? You will say no. Then they will ask, can I have half bottle of Coke? Obviously it looks like a compromise. Then you will agree half of bottle of Coke as a compromise. So what you should realize is your kid is getting smarter day by day. And he's also good in negotiation. So the first point that I'm trying to bring up is all of us negotiate. Don't think negotiation is wrong. Negotiation is not evil. The second point that I'm trying to cover up is negotiation is the backbone of relationship or business. There are sometimes your friends did not reciprocate appropriately for something you have done. You actually feel bad about it. Reason for that is your negotiation did not go well as it did not meet your expectations. There are some aspects you don't negotiate. In your daily activities, you are constantly negotiating. Negotiation is nothing but a process to meet your expectations. So once you start thinking in this manner, you'll start thinking for both sides of the equation, which will make you a better strategic person. For example, let us say that you want to get paid $150,000 per year annual salary for a job. By asking that amount directly, chances of you getting that are very slim. In order for you to get $150,000 per year salary, first question you should ask yourself is, how can I get $150,000 per year salary? First you will do research on finding the salary range for that job and the title, and the best place is go to glassdoor.com. So within an organization where you are going, you will try to do research and find the approximate salary range for the job. By doing this, you are making the other guy, who is the decision maker's life much easier by asking what you want and what he can offer. So the third point is the negotiation process makes you more strategic and makes you a smarter person in the process. So these are the three reasons why you should negotiate. So we have highly accomplished panel members and a diverse group of experts here to address on the topic. Since we have a lot of ground to cover and only 1 hour is left, so I'm going to ask only one question to each of the panel members and then open it up to the attendees. So thank you so much for cooperation. So let us start with Glenn Noga.
No, I think we should talk about which one we start with.
So obviously you negotiated with a lot of vendors. When you negotiate with your vendors, what is your bottom line? Is your bottom line to get best possible deal for you or best possible deal for both of you? And how do you think about it?
Okay. Yeah, it's a very good question. I kind of go back to something you said in your introductory remarks about knowing what you want. And so certainly any negotiation I've gone into, it's knowing what I want out of it. And best price isn't always it, right? Because as you look at a product, you look at software, you look at services, you've got to look holistically from price, quality, timeliness, schedule. There's a whole set of metrics that in any purchase activity, or it could be an employee activity, that I'll sit down and identify first. What am I trying to get, and what's the priority of importance to me for each one of those items. So in the end, failing cheaply is a bad thing. And so, it could be success of the project, could be quality of the deliverable, that I may end up prioritizing those higher. And so I want to go in knowing what it is I'm looking for. And then as part of the discussion, it's trying to understand the other person's interest in what they want out of it. Could be end of the quarter, and what the guy really wants is to close as quickly as possible to get his commission, right? To actually get the revenue associated with this deal as part of this quarter's commission. And understanding that is important, because that may mean if I agree to that, I've got to go back and make sure internally all the wheels will turn correctly to get this person what they want. And in the end, in most cases, I'm looking at it as win-win on both sides, because typically you do a deal, it's not a one-off event. Sometimes in life they are, but my experience has been that I'll continue to interact with these individuals over a period of time and making it successful on their side. In the end, makes it successful on my side and allows me to achieve whatever those set of criteria are that I was after in the first place.
So thank you, Glenn. Yeah, so it's always going after win-win situation for both the parties will always work out. So by the way, Glenn has served as CIO and CTO for leading companies including Polycom, Handspring, Moderator.com, and Robert Half International. He also spent 16 years with Anderson Consulting, rising to partner within the global consulting organization. So while at Anderson, Glenn worked with a range of global companies in a variety of industries, including computer software, transportation, and manufacturing. Glenn has a bachelor's and master's degree in industrial engineering from Stanford University. So now let us hear from Raju Reddy garu. Where do you see your negotiation skills helping in your business or your venture, and how do you think about this negotiation process?
First of all, I want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity, and I'm just delighted to share this morning or afternoon with you all. And just by way of background, it might be helpful so you have a context for any thoughts on this question that Sridhar just asked me. Yeah, I spent about 10 years at Intel, variety of engineering and marketing management roles before I came out and started my company, Sierra Atlantic. Built it over 17 years, mid-tier IT services company, primarily focused around IP and business process integration. And so we were bought out by Hitachi just late last year, and December 31st, in fact. And so it's been less than 6 months. And when Sridhar called me and asked me about being on the panel and this topic, the thing that struck me most about an important negotiation, if you will, that I've gone through is the exit with Hitachi when they were buying my company. But back to the question that you asked, Sridhar. There's no question. I think Glenn touched upon that very well. I mean, negotiation is always a win-win, or at least the successful negotiations as I think about it, right? They ought to be always a win-win. It's never a win-lose proposition. And negotiation is just one important step, but it's just one step of a relationship building or a trust relationship that you strive to build, whether it is with your customers or partners, vendors, whoever it be, right? All stakeholders in your business. And I guess the way I think about this also is you really want to also develop alternatives, at the same time. However, it's while it is a win-win, you certainly want to be, as Glenn I think touched on it very nicely, you have to know what you want out of this. And once you decide that, it's always helpful to, again, I'm thinking more in the context of a business, when you're either raising money or when you're selling a company, right? And certainly I'm not talking about when you go out shopping, and my wife would be a much better panelist than I am for that, right? And I'm maybe speaking for the rest of the panelists here too. But so in those cases, creating a sense of competition, certainly when you're out there raising capital or an exit situation like that, I think it goes a long way in just helping you achieve the things that you feel are really important for your own objective in that case. Just a quick show of hands, it'll help. How many of you today consider yourself to be an entrepreneur or an aspiring entrepreneur that you might be thinking? Oh, that's a pretty big crowd. That's wonderful. Good, good. Yeah. Again, that just gives me a sense for, the importance, the topics that are important to you folks, right? And so, yeah, I would say it's really important to have that sense of competition, create the sense of competition, for the other party. And all, in the right way. This is not to sort of, be, I would tell the other party, well, here, these are the things that are very important for me, and and here are the reasons why. And I think that goes a long way in achieving. At the end of the day, it is a win-win. And the other thing that I would say is, again, also from the standpoint of in my own company's evolution, we ourselves bought 4 companies before we got bought out, right, by Hitachi. And in each of those cases, one thing that I also felt was very important is the other person has to like you also. So it is important to be, likable in, I can't think of any other good way to describe that. And because you have to live with that other person, right? You have to work with that other person once the transaction is completed. And when you, and this I'm speaking more from the standpoint of a buyer as opposed to the seller, right? In the case of Hitachi, I'm the seller. In the case of the other 4 companies that we bought, we were the buyer, right? And I felt that is always very important. It made the transaction process much easier, And anyway, those are kind of thoughts, but I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Raju. By the way, how many of you attended last year's Kanwal Rekhi's speech? So what is the connection between Kanwal Rekhi and Raju? So yesterday I had a good conversation with Raju, and he was saying Kanwal Rekhi was his mentor, and he has been his mentor for the last 15 years, and also is part of the board. And Kanwal Rekhi is the only person who has stuck to his company for the past 15 years. So he has been a backbone, and he was getting guidance from him all the time. So the key thing is picking up the mentor is also a key thing for your company to be successful. So as part of that, okay, Sridhar is going to start Sridhar Panchapakeshan. So he's also the backbone of our all NIT meets. So he's going to start the mentorship program pretty soon. So he and Gaurav Kuchal and Prakash Muppalla, all 3 folks will be working on starting a mentorship program. So please participate in it and take advantage of it. Okay. So more announcements will be there on that. And also, Raju holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from BITS Pilani, and a Master's of Science degree in Computer Science from Virginia Tech. So he has been a member of BITS Pilani Board of Directors and a charter member of TIE Silicon Valley. He served as a member of Board of Trustees for Puente Wharton School non-profit program, which helps underprivileged communities worldwide gain access to the technology. He also co-founded SIPA, which is known by Silicon Valley Indian Professional Association. So he started it in 1987. So Raju currently serves on the boards of both Hitachi Consulting US and Hitachi Consulting India entities. Now let us hear from NS Sambamurthy, whom I have already introduced, who is already popularly known as Samba. So where do you see your negotiation skills helping in your business or your venture? And pretty much the same question that I asked Raju. And how do you think about this negotiation process? And where do you think it makes the biggest impact?
Okay. To follow up on a popular polling technique here. My first question is, how many of you, and I'll explain the reason why I'm asking that after I get the answers. How many of you are less than 45 years old? Wow. How many are less than 50? Trick question. Everybody should have raised their hand, right? So anyway, jokes aside, the reason why I asked that question is really there's a big raging debate going on startups in Silicon Valley, and what is the age criteria for being successful? And there seems to be a popular opinion that you got to be a young kid fresh out of college, must be 20 something to be successful. And I'm happy to see that there's a whole bunch of people here who are a lot older than 20. Okay. That being said, so let me share with you my take on negotiations. Negotiations, I have learned, is actually a tool to accomplish objectives. So if I look at the starting example of your kid coming and asking you for a Coke, the objective for the kid is actually to figure out how to get himself some Coke. And really, it's a question of full bottle or half a bottle. And you as a parent are trying to figure out, I need to control the kid's sugar intake. So you have an objective too. So it's all about negotiations as a tool to accomplish a certain objective that you got in mind. And so I have learned this the hard way over a period of years as a kid, looking back, introspecting, talking to people, and it's all about interactions. And one of the other things related to the tactics is what people are already mentioning. It's all about relationships. Okay? So everybody tends to think of negotiations purely in terms of business, but it's not. It actually happens every single day for all kinds of activities. So the bottom line is there is a personal aspect of everything. It's all about interactions. So the social media stuff is all actually about negotiations too, at the end of the day. So that being said, first rule I've always learned to practice now is to have a mission or an objective in place. Only with that, you can engage in the act of negotiation with the other party. And then you got to keep in mind, what is the other side want to accomplish? So it goes back down to if it is a short-term objective, where it's a project that you got to get executed on time, and you really don't have any follow-up activities after that, then you could go in and say, okay, I'm just going to go focus on getting somebody with this very short-term objectives and not worry about consequences. But reality is, there is always an opportunity for you to build a relationship. So you really don't want to use the time and pressure and pricing as a main criteria to make any decisions. That's the bottom line. And so you really want to figure out how you can build lasting relationships. That's a fundamental lesson I've learned. So one of the examples I'd like to share with you is back in 2001, one of the startups I had done. The theory I had was, this was right after the 2000 crash, and I started my activities of early research, and I said, this is a great time to start. And a couple of my friends believed in my idea. We put the money, did a bunch of research. In 2002, I started raising money. Two things happened. One was we were still not at the bottom. We had not hit the bottom. We were still finding the lows. It was a miserable exercise raising money. So I had to go through raising money with multiple venture guys. So I ended up actually spending almost 6 months. I had a VC syndicate of sort. Okay? So I had, in tough times, I had a 2 VC syndicate, 3 VCs on one side, and a 2 VC syndicate on the other side, gave me the competing term sheets. And the reason was not about finding the lowest valuations or anything, but it's about finding people who are going to hang with me through the trials and tribulations of building a startup. Okay? And so that was all about relationship. The interesting thing was the VC I turned down. I'm still good friends. And my co-founder from my last venture ended up starting another company which got acquired, and he ended up funding this person because of the relationships we built back in 2002. So I'm a big believer in using these opportunities to do that. The second example I'll give you is hiring. I decided to dismantle the traditional style of developing complex chip, because the reason was very simply I had to figure out how to take the business cost and restructure it so it is it's a lot more cost optimal, if you will. Because if you're going to build a very large computation intensive chip, you need to raise a lot of money. So my original blueprint asked for raising $20 million. I finally ended up raising 7.5, and the reason was He took the concept and decided to break it in pieces and parceled it out outside design consultants or partners, if you will. And the interesting exercise was I had multiple offers, and one of them was so anxious to get it, he gave me a ridiculously low value pricing. And we sat down and chatted with that company, and we said, look, there's no way for you to survive on this stuff because you got to hire engineers to do the scaling. We ended up not picking them up. I ended up actually picking up somebody in the middle ground. The highest value stuff we rejected. We ended up building a long-term relationship. So the bottom line, even the company which I rejected, that gentleman came back later, and we are good friends. We still stay in touch. That company has gone off to do well. So bottom line, it's relationship-driven negotiation is very important to keep in mind, and it's objective-driven, and you got to have both sides in mind. And win-win comes when both of you accomplish your objectives.
So thank you, Samba. NS Sambamurthy is a Silicon Valley serial entrepreneur in the high-tech industry, and he has been incubating several prototype technologies using customer case studies to address new emerging business issues at the intersection of mobile, enterprise computing, sensors, cloud computing, location-based services, and digital identity. And he's focused on applications and IT usage models requiring new foundation capabilities for infrastructure protection while maintaining both personal and business secrets. He's actively engaged as advisor and board members of several high-tech companies with focus on social media, big data analytics, and human resource management. He holds BSE and MSE degrees with multiple patents on Ethernet and data communications technology. So there are a lot of Cisco guys, they can interact with him. So now let us hear from Anil Advani. So what are the typical line of negotiation in your line of work? Could you talk about a scenario where negotiation did not work out for you?
For me or my clients? Just to be sure.
Lawyer always wins.
Right, I still bill for that. Right? So I guess I thought my job was done because these gentlemen have already covered everything you need to know about negotiations. Frankly, there's so much been written about negotiations. I guess go online, buy books, so many cliches, win-wins, all of that good stuff. By the way, I was taking notes. So in any in the event any one of you has seen me type on my phone, it's not ignoring I was just taking notes just to be sure. I'm not one of those lawyers, who ignores everyone else.
It's getting recorded, I think.
Yeah.
When people
You're gonna
watch
get a bill.
on the video, they'll be
Right.
What is Anil?
Yes, no, I'm taking notes, just to be sure.
And he's going to send you the bill.
I'd like to, because I think it's important. A lot of good stuff was said, but I want to also allude to that. And unfortunately, I don't have on my notepad, but electronically, I think it's a good idea. Anyways, so as I said, lots of good things have been said. I don't think anyone in this room would debate that win-win solution is the right way to go, stuff like that. Let me sort of distract, and then I'll go back to your specific, my thoughts on negotiations, and then go back to your specifics. I think, so let's start from your example of, your kid coming to your Coke, with the Coke bottle. I think the most important part of negotiation from that example, but I think it overlays everything we do in our lives when we're negotiating, which is, by the way, most of the times, is that you have to know what you want or what the sort of bottom line is and be able to back it up. So to take that example, just saying no to your kid is not going to cut it, as we all know. The kid will have a follow-up question. They'll say, why? You need to know why a 7-year-old, or if you have a 10-year-old, should not be drinking Coke. You need to know what others in her class are doing. And I'm speaking from my own experience. I have an 8-year-old. She would come back and say, by the way, Jennifer, drinks Coke, so why not me? You have to have a good, valid reason. If it means that, you say Jennifer doesn't have an iPhone, but you do, that's great, but you need to be able to back it up, And you can't contradict yourself. And it's again, similar to any negotiations. You cannot say that, Coke is bad, but it's not bad for me, and by the way, I drink 5 bottles of Coke. Be careful about that, right? Or if you're doing that, then again, have a reason. Maybe it's, if you're 10-year-old, then your teeth get spoiled, but after 20, they're stronger. Whatever it is, make sure, and I'm just taking that example, but that outlines most negotiations that you will enter into. The second point, I think, very well laid out was the personality part of it. You are always negotiating with people. I mean, you sometimes negotiate with your dog for fetching the ball and whatnot. But in the context of our discussion, you're negotiating with people. So understand that. Don't be an asshole. You might think that, and don't go to, I mean, in my practice, a lot of times, my clients or potential clients come to me and say, hey, you don't dress like a lawyer, or you don't, you're not banging the table hard enough and all that. That's not the way to win or to get to that win-win. It's to know what you want, to work with other people who are experienced, take their counsel. If I'm telling you, if you're coming to me as a client and you're paying me for my counsel, don't ignore it just because you don't like what I'm hearing, what I'm saying. So have all of your and the other thing, as I was saying, know what you want. Only you should know what the value of your company is. Don't let a dumb lawyer sitting behind a desk tell you what the value of your company is. I can give you the data. I can tell you that the last 5 companies in that line of business, or from this VC, that VC, got this valuation. These are the reasons. You have a great team, or you have you lack the team or a key advisor, so maybe your valuation will get, maybe you don't have patents. I can give you all of that data. But don't let me tell you or anyone else tell you what the value of your company has to be. You should know what will work for you and not work for you. That's the sort of bottom line. When you're negotiating with VCs, keep in mind that VCs are, contrary to popular belief, they're not investing because the valuation of the company is 3 million over 4 million, so they get to save $1 million. They're investing because they like you. So get them to the point where they like you, they like what you're doing, they like your team, they like the IP, they like the business opportunity. And then you start the negotiations on the valuation, because now you've got them, as I say, pregnant. That's when you start negotiating on when whether they're going to be the dad of their baby or not, to put it truly. You don't start by going out and on your business profiles or your business presentation putting high value, looking for 5 million at 10 million valuation. It's a bad idea. Just because, firstly, you're presenting what your limitations are. And you're also not getting to a stage first where you should be talking about stuff that's important for you and that these guys should be attracted towards. So basically, the art of negotiation, get the other side to where you want them to be. You have to know where you want them to be, and then get them to the point where you want them to be. And that's where you start negotiating, the real hard negotiations on numbers and structures, not before. Because you're sort of putting the cart before the horse and would not work for you. So in terms of an event, I guess, that hasn't worked for me or my client. The other thing, so as I was saying, don't be an asshole. The flip side of what was said earlier, these are the people you'll work with. If there is an employee that you hired because he was an H1 and you could screw their green cards and so you paid them less, it's going to come back to you. I think the valley is very small word, believe it or not. And the employee is an example. If there's a co-founder that you were working with and it didn't work out, that will come back to you in some form or the other. And especially if you are actually working with that person. If you hire someone and pay them less, be on the lookout. They'll always be looking for a way to cheat you or try to make that money, because in their mind they've got less than what they deserve. So, you might think you're getting away with more money, but at the end of the day you'll probably end up losing money, losing your sleep, looking over your shoulder about whether this employee is really working hard because you know that he's not getting paid full. So there's a flip side of, you will end up working with these people and a great relationship helps, but if it's not a great relationship, it's not built on a win-win, it will also come back to harm you in some form. Many times in a form that's intangible, you may not even be aware of, but you could be losing money or your credibility. Many times investors might talk to that ex-employee or key founder, and that might be the decision in their investing or deciding not to invest in your company. So be mindful of how these things play. I don't want to get into more philosophical and karma and all of that good stuff, but these are tangible things that come and play in your life, especially as you work with that very small ecosystem we've developed here in Silicon Valley. That was also my long-winded way of trying to figure out the example that I can address. I'd say one example, and I'm not going to name the companies and whatnot, but one example that didn't of negotiations where it didn't work for us. When I say us, the client, but on the team as such, is when we were negotiating with the government of India. Again, it's not as applicable to each of you. You probably will not end up negotiating with the government of India in most cases. But when we are negotiating with the government of India, and the challenge was how they look at something. And this, the application of this is in any other world as well, whether you're negotiating with VCs or your wife or whoever else. you have to understand not just what you're doing, but also how they perceive. So the politicians, for example, will be politicians. Bureaucrats will be bureaucrats. You could have the brightest idea, you could pitch for it, you could make the best business case that a VC would invest, or lots of good co-founders will join you, you can form a team. But if the bureaucrats don't get it, or they don't understand the incentives or what's in it for them, or things that will work for them, it will not work for you. So if you take that context outside of that, my example, and you want to apply it to where VCs, or you're looking for, let's say, co-founders, another example is where, and this is a sort of, exactly of what not to do. 3 guys started a company, 2 were in the Bay Area. I've been working with them, they were friends of mine on the side. At one point they came into my office and said, hey, great news, we've got a term sheet from one of the VCs on Sand Hill. Now we want to get formed, started with the founder stock and stuff like that. So they've been sort of doing it on the side. I hadn't been really aware of what they were doing. We've been discussing a few things about, incorporating and basic stuff, but hadn't really started working with them. So from my office, then they made the call to the 3rd co-founder. And the 3rd co-founder, it turns out, was in Arizona. And they said, hey, we've got this $5 million dollar term sheet, so we hopefully, Anil said, we can close in a month from today, back to back. When are you planning to move to California? Dead silence. Dead silence. It turns out that the issue about the 3rd co-founders moving from Arizona to California had never been discussed within the founder group. Again, that did not work for anybody there, because the 3rd co-founder had put almost 6-9 months of his time invested. He was going to be the CTO guy. He'd actually been presented to the VCs as a CTO guy on that cap table, on the the presentations. And now we have an issue where, and frankly, these guys had promised the VCs that he's going to be moving, but they never really discussed it with the co-founder about his plans. He said, I have a job here, I have a mortgage here, my kids go to school. When did we talk about moving? And dead silence, as you can imagine, right? So we had to sort of unravel that situation. He ended up staying there, got a little bit of stock. They ended up hiring somebody else. He remained an advisor to the company. But the point is, where it does not work is where you haven't thought about some of the key issues and take things for granted, or assume that everyone around you is also looking at the same picture as you are. So be careful about that.
So thank you, Anil. By the way, Mr. Advani's practice focuses on the formation, financing, and general corporate counseling of emerging companies and technology businesses. So he is also very active in various India-focused emerging companies, and also investment in banks, financial institutions, and venture funds, both in US as well as in India. He is the principal at Inventus Law, and was most recently of counsel and head of the India practice at Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe. Before joining Orrick, Mr. Advani was general counsel and vice president of SEM India, a pioneering effort to establish semiconductor manufacturing in India. As the General Counsel for SEM India, Mr. Advani was responsible for coordinating with the Government of India in formulating a comprehensive semiconductor policy for India, as well as with the state of Andhra Pradesh in structuring Fab City on the outskirts of the city of Hyderabad. So by the way, one of our NIT alumni started a huge manufacturing plant in Fab City. It's called Solar Semiconductor.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know Hari.
Yeah, Hari. Yeah. So prior to joining SEM India, Mr. Advani was a senior associate in the Silicon Valley offices of Kohli Godward, where his practice focused on representing emerging companies and the venture funds and banks that finance those companies. Mr. Advani began his legal career as an attorney in India, where he practiced for a number of years at High Court of Delhi. So a lot of buzz is happening in India right now in Delhi. So Mr. Advani has a
Facebook status on that.
So Mr. Advani has a Bachelor of Commerce from Delhi University, Bachelor of Laws from the Faculty of Law, Delhi University, and a Master of Laws from Georgetown University Law Center, Washington, D.C. And he is licensed to practice law in California, New York, and India. So now I will open up questions to the attendees. So who will ask the first question?
Hey, thank you very much, panelists, for very insightful comments. I guess one of the things that I was wondering if you could share is pre-negotiation messaging and positioning. So in a way, I guess where you really, before getting to the table, you obviously have to send some kind of a message or establish an anchor so you can start the negotiation. So in that process, if you obviously you've done so many negotiations in your career, you can share any insights, any interesting observations of how you message. And politics, right now, if you look at it, the Democrats and the Republicans are constantly sending messages, where they will stand on various issues. So I think that really sets the stage of where you want to start off your discussion at the table. So any insights from that would be great.
Yeah, I can comment on it from my recent experience, as I mentioned, both in exiting and also when we are buying companies, right? But in each sense, I told my executive staff, for example, even with the Hitachi deal, or even with the board, it was not an easy decision. First of all, each negotiation, each situation has its own peculiar context, right? In this particular case, they had contacted us about a year ago, before the deal was done. And in fact, the last couple of deals to us in the Midwest region, that's always a good way to get noticed, the Hitachi consulting team. And it's not a deal that we are sort of committed to doing. I told my staff, this thing, you never know if it may or may not happen. And even the board, for that matter, on the board there was not a unanimous sort of consent either that we should do the deal. So a lot of the positioning that you're talking about internally, telling people, telling myself and the board that, hey, it's perfectly, this deal doesn't have to happen. If it happens on our terms, well and good. And here are our terms. Now, the reason why, of course, we are considering this is, there are some good reasons, right? But I think a lot of it is, just making sure my management team understands, and also, and also my board. And a lot of times, I, used to say, Silicon Valley, and we're sitting right here in Cisco. Cisco is a company that just extremely, it's got probably the best record in the Valley for, growth through acquisitions. So they bought a lot of companies, right? So when people ask me about how do you build company to be acquired, I always felt I have to build it to be a high quality public company someday. Then the right things will happen. So I guess that mindset, the positioning internally, telling me and my board and my executives that, look, there are alternatives and we really are striving to build a high quality public company. If something, right, an opportunity comes up, fine, we'll evaluate that. And, and the other part of it is, as a buyer, I've seen that, in fact, I'll never want to buy a company that is too desperate or, is kind of on the decline or something. And believe me, again, I'm talking specifically about an acquisition here, of course. It can be a pretty lengthy process, especially when you're dealing with the Japanese, but even otherwise it does. It's a long process. So your management team can easily get distracted, and your revenues, your leads, a lot of those things can start, dissipating. And so if you take your eye off the ball from that standpoint, then the buyer's interest really diminishes considerably, and your leverage kind of diminishes too. So anyway, that's a thought.
I'll take that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting question. It also depends. I think that's where there is a difference between the generic rules of negotiation, the win-wins and personalities and whatnot, and where you are in the process, right? If you're starting a company, you're negotiating at different levels, right? When you're starting a company, you're actually negotiating for your life. You're negotiating with the company on the amount of stock you will get. You're negotiating with your co-founders on the amount of stock he or she will get. And then as you grow, you'll start negotiating with your VCs on the sort of structuring and the valuation of the company that they will get. And then, as Raju was saying, we get to a point where you're selling the company, you're also then, it's a different level of negotiations, right? So the signals or the sort of preparation you do depends on what level of negotiations you're undertaking. And as I said, the general rules of personalities and whatnot may not apply. If you're selling the company and getting out and you're not going to be having an earn-outs or have an executive position with the buyer, maybe personalities may not care as much as getting the right value and getting the exit there. On the other hand, negotiating with your founder or co-founder is more important because you're going to have to live together for a while. In terms of the specific question itself, I have one of the most exciting practices that any lawyer can get, which is working with startup guys. And it's very interesting when I start working with entrepreneurs, you can actually pick out the guys who stand out and who are going to be successful or who are going to be able to take it to the next level. And the way you do that is that those people are signaling to me and everyone else involved in the process that they're going to do it. They have the body language that they're in it for the long run. Whether they've left their jobs or not, I mean that's an issue. I mean that's obviously an element of looking at how evaluating their prospects, but their body language of, hey, I don't care whether you're in this or not. I'm going to do it. So you want to come for the ride, great. Otherwise, you're lost. That sort of body language, knowing and having the confidence. But also sort of, I'm going to say something that may not make sense, and it's for each of you to take that interpretation as you like. But being flexible yet firm, right? Flexible in the way you sort of throw the buzzwords around, but being firm about what will work for you, what works for you, and what you will take or not take, right? So if you're negotiating, for example, with the VC, which is the most sort of common sort of element of where my practice is, you also want to be able to provide the sort of the signals, if you will, as to your specific point, that you've got traction with your customers. You've got traction with there may be other VCs just down the street. Keep in mind, again, these are human beings, right? So VC will get, like dating, right? I mean, if you're the hot guy, everyone wants to date you. So you have to signal to everybody that you are that hot guy. Their loss if they don't, come out and date you. How you do that is more personality. Obviously, there's a fine line between legal and illegal or non-legal, ethical, unethical. But the most successful people are the ones who can actually dance that, on the line. Getting to a stretch where they actually say things that are very attractive and the right signals, and knowing when sort of they're crossing the line, so it could actually be illegal or unethical. So understanding that, and many times it comes with experience. But the signal that you're giving at any given point is your body language, your preparation, you're in it for the long run, that you're hot. There are other people that, if in an acquisition, for example, as Raju was saying, nobody will buy you if you're desperate, or nobody will, even if you're internally. Like if Raju's board is not internally fully set up or fully supportive, don't let that signal go out, right? Also, it's, in terms of preparation is also what not to do or how to control and manage a situation. Because if a potential buyer sees that weakness, the valuation might be lower, or their counsel might come back with stringent conditions. The closing might get delayed. You have to manage your issues internally, make sure those are not. If you and your co-founder have an issue about how to structure your founder stock, get that done away from the VCs, because VCs will see that weakness, they'll try to exploit it. So it's not just signals that you have to do, but also things that you have to manage internally before you actually start going out, before you get ready for the spotlight.
Okay. I'm worried because now I have to worry about whether I'm hot or not. Well, maybe not from buying a company, but from deals I've done as I've looked at product purchases and service purchases. I think the most important thing to me, and we've talked a lot about win-win, part of that is clearly communicating. And actually, it always seems counterintuitive in a negotiation, like you don't want them to know what you're really after so you can try to manipulate them into that. I mean, I found as I've laid out the criteria that I want, I've gone in and saying, these are the things I want. I've often taken to the extreme how I see those things being achieved, which then starts the conversation back and forth as to where we'll come in the middle. But going into that, I've known where I'm willing to, what I'm willing to compromise on and where I have to stop the compromise and say, okay, if you can't deliver for this time frame and this amount of cost, then and this level of quality, then you're right, we don't have a deal. Or if we can't get these kinds of guarantees of service, these kinds of guarantees of deliverable, then we can't actually come to agreement on what the deal is. And candidly, it's being able to walk away from it too when you say it just doesn't work. So I've taken the point of view of, here's what's really important to me, and theoretically then what that would be to me, right? Which is, I'd like the ultimate low cost, ultimate fast schedule, ultimately highest quality, all those components of it. and they get an understanding of what my thinking is, and they're able to come back and then say, well, this is how we view those things and what we're able to do as an organization. And I've got to go into it realizing that I know typically all those things aren't achievable, that to make it a long-term winning relationship, they're going to come back and tell me where their strengths are in that set of criteria, what they can do effectively, and therefore I now have some additional information to take that next set of steps and move the process along. And I got to think about being hot. It's a good one.
All right. Well, to go back to what I mentioned at the start, everything starts with your objective and the other party's objective. And I think looking at the comments, I would say you did the buy side of it, right? So it's a buyer's perspective. So I'll give you the seller's perspective. So the bottom line is, in any transaction, there's always a buy side and a sell side. It's always the case, two parties. So if you have an objective, one of the first things is, if you're a seller, the first order of business, before we even start messaging, is to nail down, as Anil has put down, the team has to get on the same page. It's an absolute mandatory, critical rule that your entire team stay on the message. Don't start your negotiating messaging process if you can't line up your ducks, as they say. So you all have to speak with one voice. You cannot have dissension in the ranks. And your team might have different objectives they want to get out of this transaction. And so it's very, very important to get yourself aligned before you step out of the thing and start messaging. Second part, on the other side of it, the counter side, on the buyer side, if you will, you have to understand, and typically if it's a one-to-one, two people, then it's a simple exercise. But typically reality today is a complex issue. If you walk into a large company or a small company, depending on how big the entity is, you're always going to find multiple people involved in the transaction. So that complicates your messaging activities. So the number one step you need to do is to identify who I would call, in classic business language terms, who is the economic buyer and who is the user buyer. And the third entity could be even a technology buyer. Sometimes all three different pieces may be in one individual, or it's split across groups, if you will, right? So you really need to sit down, take the time to figure out, what does the economic buyer want? What does the user buyer want? Who does the technology buyer want? So your messaging has to be translated for each of those entities. Otherwise, as Anil was pointing out, his government transaction stuff, if you have a bureaucrat, don't waste your time trying to sell your technology. That is not what they're there. So it's really different stroke for different people. So your messaging needs to be smart. So do your homework before you go engage in that. That's the biggest thing I learned over the years.
I think I just want to add, I don't know how many of you have actually read or read Godfather or seen the movie. I think that's sort of the heart and sort of nuts and bolts of negotiation. And make an offer you can't refuse, they can't refuse. And also very importantly, the whole, and I was obviously very impressed with that. And anyway, so there was this one sentence that that actually turned, where the son, I don't know again how many of you can relate, but where the son spoke out in front of the third party about his disagreement with his father's decision to not deal in drug dates. That actually turned the whole family's sort of fortunes around, just that one. And his father picked up and said, never disagree with me in public. So if you're the CEO, make sure that you're the godfather everyone knows they should not disagree with. They don't like it, again, obviously I'm not saying be a dictator and don't listen to ideas, but that is sort of in terms of, signals. It has to be one signal, and it has also to be very clear on who's making that communication, right? Not multiple levels. Control that, managing that process is really essential to the signals you send.
So next question. You want to come here and ask a question?
Thank you very much. It has been a great insight so far. One of the questions is, you all spoke about understanding the interests and motivation of the buyer or the opposite party. one thing we can do due diligence, understanding about what their motivations or interests could be. After that, when you are in negotiation, when you are face to face, what are the types of questions you would ask? What are the tips that you have that we can understand what are the motivations of the opposite party? Is there any tips or insights that you can share?
I will tell you what. I will tell you what works for me. I'm very direct. I flat out sit down face to face and say, what do you want? Trust me, it always works. Being very direct and being very candid always breaks the logjam, and you need to learn to do that.
And I think,
So I agree with being direct. I think to your comment earlier on buyer and the two parties, even as a buyer, I've often looked at you have to identify the right decision maker, because in a lot of cases the first person you sit with across the table isn't the person that has all the authority to grant you what you want in the negotiation. And so understanding what that person wants and what their span of authority is and who else needs to really come into the decision process, you want to get there as quickly as possible so you can actually begin to engage the people that have the authority and the power to make the end deal that you want to see.
Yeah, just one quick thought. When I'm selling out there to CIOs, I must say, Glenn just reminded me before we started off that I was on the losing side of a negotiation with him. And actually, I guess that was my team that was trying to do a deal at Polycom several years ago. And so one of the things that I do ask a lot.
Whose loss was that?
Yeah, I guess IBM's the one that got Anyway, sorry. In that case, you are, I guess, competing with IBM, I think you said? Yeah, okay. Anyway, one of the things, again, back to this sort of relationship thing, it's not a, however trite it might sound, it's not a win-lose thing, but it really is, you have to live with that person, that, right, that work with that person or that organization. So one of the questions that I, often ask is, because this person would have gone through similar transactions before. So tell me a little bit about, you'd have done this, 20 times before. So what are the things? Some relationships would have worked out well, some not so well. So what is it that me, as a new partner coming in, need to know about the reasons why some relationships for you? This is post the deal, right? Post transaction. And can you help me understand that? Because that will give you a little bit more insight into the psyche on what is important to that person and the organization.
One thing I will add to, which I should mention, if you have intermediaries or proxies, as I call them, be aware that a lot of the times your messaging will get distorted if you have an intermediary. So you really need to make sure that if you have an intermediary in the loop, you got to figure out who's behind it on the decision making. That's very important. And the answer is to be very upfront and ask, okay, what's your role?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Glenn and Samba. It actually is amplified in the India context. There have been instances, and this is the first thing I actually flesh out for my clients, where there are times where we've negotiated or they have negotiated a business deal for 6 months. We get to an LOI, they come to my office, we start doing the LOI based on those various emails. Turns out that the CFO guy they were negotiating with now says, hey, my CEO now has these 5 other questions and this is what we... It starts the whole process again. So especially in India where, CFOs don't have as much apparent authority as, CFOs here to bind the company, and it's always layers of decision making. Be very careful and try to flesh that out as soon as possible. Otherwise, you're really negotiating against yourself. You're giving up items. You're trading back and forth. You get to an LOI, and now they start negotiating with other 5 points that the CEO needs to now get to. So that's very important for you to nail down who the decision maker is and what it would take. Whether he or she is part of the negotiations or not, but what it would take to get their decision, whether it's synced with whoever you're talking to. I think that's very important. The second is preparation, as has been said earlier. It's in this day and age, it's criminal for you to actually enter into a negotiation not knowing about, if you're selling the company, then whether your target buyer what their deals have been, how many, it's all out there, if you can't find that, you shouldn't be in the business of running a business, really. The information about what they paid for it, the fact that they're actually hiring a group of engineers to target a business that you are actually selling, maybe that's where their focus is. LinkedIn, social networks, their own website, tons of information. If you don't have the bandwidth, task someone to get you that data in an organized fashion, then you can structure it. And as you work along with them, keep, it's not a one-off thing. Don't, stop there. As you start working with them and learning more about it, continue that information seeking. It's very, you'll be surprised. All public companies are required to file copies of their material agreements with the SEC. It's all publicly available. So do yourself the favor of going or engaging someone who can get you that information so you can be fully prepared all throughout that process, on the tradings as you progress.
Yeah, key thing is doing research before approaching your potential buyer or seller. So next question, and the last question. Three hands.
Let's negotiate again. Outside.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very good insight.
Now turn this way. Okay, sorry. Recording. Yeah, that's better.
In the negotiations and difficult conversations, for example, there is a buzzword generally we use called legitimacy. So how you applied in your negotiations, because we understand from your conversations that we need to have some, what do we want from the before starting our negotiations. So legitimacy basically, is it you need to apply to understand what exactly we want, or how you applied this buzzword in your conversations or negotiations?
I think, as I was saying, the Coke reference, have credibility. You can't say no to your daughter about Coke and be doing the same thing, right? So you lose credibility there. Also, I think most importantly, at any given process, if you say something that proves to be wrong, you've lost it. I would suggest you walk away from that deal, because there's no way to. So you can say things, you can make claims, whatever, as I said, it should be ethical and legal, but make sure, firstly, don't get caught, but more importantly, make sure that what you're saying you can back up. I think it's very important for you to be able to, and once you're at a stage where you can't back up and the other party calls you out, you cannot win from there. It's only a downhill situation. So I would always recommend you walk away, because there's nothing left to retain. In any relationship, frankly, but certainly in a business relationship where you're looking to sell the company and some key element of what you stated turns out to be inaccurate, you have to be able to, you should have predicted that and manage and be ready to manage it. And obviously, not to get to a point where your credibility is on the line in that transaction.
Yeah, I would agree with Anil. Any claims you make, you better be credible. You better have backups. But the fundamental requirement is you cannot ask for what I would call pipe dreams or wishful thinking, just because your strategy is to figure out how aggressively you can ask for something and figure out how much you can get away with. It never works in real life. So legitimacy, as you put it, it needs to be grounded in practicality and a little bit of pragmatism. So you got to figure out what is it you're willing to accomplish and what's your objective. Keep that in mind. And if you try to get more than your real, goals, you're going to end up with a relationship downstream, which could be not very good, because you don't want, after the transaction, people find out the real truth comes out always. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it can happen after years, and then what you're going to find is the relationships you might have built will get destroyed very quickly. So you don't want to do that.
I think it's okay. Maybe we can field one more question. I don't.
We are running out of time.
Yeah. Okay.
Last question?
Yeah, you can give last comments if you want.
Oh, okay.
Just 1 minute comment.
All right. Yeah, so I'm not sure I'll be addressing your question, because I think you've heard enough. I could come. Yeah, one thing early on asked about how many people, wanting to be an entrepreneur. So I think we touched upon this sort of raising capital, because that's a very important step, right? Keep in mind the VCs are almost always like most other human beings, I guess, are motivated by one of two things, either fear or greed. Okay, so the more you can appeal to their greed, and the more likely you're going to sort of win that opportunity, right, in raising whatever capital that you're trying to. And back to essentially, it's like you want them to get into a stage where they don't want to be missing out on the opportunity. So anything you can do to create a sense of competition, to improve your business plan proposition, either getting the right founding team together, or getting a few more design wins, or patents, whatever it be that may be unique to your business. That's extremely important. And in fact, you talked about Kanwal kind of being my mentor. One of the early things he advised me back then was, it's really important for you to get not just one, if you can get at least 2 VCs into your deal, because again they have their own cycles. And I ended up having 2, and then GE came in later on, 6 months later, and they didn't want to be left out, and finally we took them in on some of the terms. But so as you go about sort of striving to be entrepreneurs and raising capital, just keep that in mind. Once you get like a lead investor, the second guy normally follows much more easily. Everybody's waiting for the other person to confirm. Now, assuming your idea has enough merit. It's just a thought that I should share.
Actually, let me go back to the question. Kind of a little bit of a different view. I like being aggressive in the discussion. I don't think you can lie. I don't think you can do things that are dishonest as part of the process, because it is going to be a long-term relationship. But the way you understand your other party's flexibility, their skills, is to be aggressive about what you're asking, as long as, well, the best place to be aggressive is the things that are really valuable to you, key to the success of what it is you're trying to accomplish. And being aggressive with that's good, because it'll help you better understand the capabilities the other party has and the flexibility they have in satisfying the need. And you may find they don't have the flexibility, or they don't have the skill sets in the areas that are important to you. So yeah, I don't want to call it illegitimate, right? It's being legitimate, but being aggressive in the areas that you want is a good thing, I find.
Yeah, the only flip side I would add to that is, not to be disagreeing at all, is you're not a Google, okay? So don't just go into a discussion, negotiation. When you can be aggressive, you certainly should be aggressive in terms of what you want, but I mean, I can't tell you how many times I look in the founder in the eye and have to say this: you're not a Google. Settle down, really. And if you don't get it, the other party will not take you seriously. You have every right to believe you will be Google, so don't misunderstand me. You should absolutely start off knowing that you will be, otherwise you shouldn't. You should be great and you have the capability, but when you start, you're not Google. So thinking about Google's valuation or how the founders have their capital structures set up, let's just come back to reality to start with. I mean, be aggressive, but within the boundaries of where you need to be as well.
So you should finish off with the Clint Eastwood quote from Sudden Impact. Man has got to know his limitations.
So I thank all the panel members for giving good insights on art of negotiation. Hope you guys will implement some of their inputs. Please give a big applause to all the panel members. So now I invite Srinivas Atluri to come forward